Can you actually get your professor fired by contacting the dean? Or in other words, do deans actually have power in a university? And I want to talk about that today because I think it's a really important topic that many people don't understand. If you don't know me, I am Professor Dave Maslach. I'm an associate professor of innovation, strategy, and entrepreneurship. And I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. All right, so can you actually get your professor fired by contacting the dean? So in most cases, no, that's not going to be the case. It is very difficult to get a professor fired, and generally the way that it works at a university is very, very democratic. If you're trying to get somebody fired, they have to go through a lot of administrative procedures to actually get to the point where they are fired. Now, can you alter the course of somebody's career by actually contacting the dean? Possibly, right? So there are moments, if they are a non-tenure track professor, sometimes in cases that is very egregious, that somebody has done something that is just not comfortable with maybe it's a dean, then they might actually address the issue by removing that particular person from the university, right? But that's a really, really egregious case where somebody is doing something that is spectacularly awful. It generally makes national, if not international news, if somebody is fired for something that is not necessarily egregious at a university. I often have seen that. I think this year there was a case in New York. I think it was one of the universities in New York that fired a professor, untenured track professor, because of the way that they were teaching. And it became a really big thing. And generally, most deans, most presidents of university don't want that negative attention. That's really not good for the university to have that. So generally, there is a lot of procedures in place to prevent things like that from happening. Now, how can you actually alter somebody's career by doing this, right? So if you contact the dean and you go through all of those procedures and you talk to them and they really do identify that there is an issue there, then at that case, in those particular situations, what ends up happening is that the dean can change their the way that they actually do work, right? So they might give them more service, more teaching, and those particular things. So service is basically serving on committees, doing administrative work. Teaching is more classroom stuff, right? If that is the particular situation, then that will alter their career quite significantly. Now, notice, you might be thinking that more teaching is kind of seems strange, right? And the reason is the way that we actually build a career in academia is we actually do research. And that research is publishing more stuff. And if somebody gives you more teaching responsibilities, it sort of takes away from that ability to do research. So it's the opposite of what you're intending on doing often. So what are those particular cases where you can actually get somebody fired, or it's a really egregious case, right? That administratively, now remember, this is not going to be taken lightly, right? Somebody is going to address your problems and help you through your problems. Nobody ever is going to be like, brush these things off. I don't think that is a really sort of real scenario. Most people take these things very seriously and all the particular sort of situations that you might have. Now, these cases that people might, get fired for it, because it's really hard to actually get fired in most workplaces, not just the university, right? So a university is just a workplace. That's it. And people can't go around, at least in many states and many locations around the world, just firing people. But if you do things that are against the law, that one would consider highly, highly unethical, those particular things would be considered probably grounds for firing. And now those are really difficult, and you often don't see those particular things happening, right? Like that stuff typically does not happen, although it does happen from time to time. And so in those cases, there's generally rules in place to get somebody fired, right? To make sure that that actually does happen. Because you don't want somebody that is doing something that is really, really uncomfortable or not good. Now, what generally is not grounds for firing people? Just this is my experience, and it changes from every institution and things like that. So, like, grade disputes generally are not grounds for somebody to actually get fired in any sort of way. The idea that that you had a bad experience in a classroom, or that they were a poor teacher, for example, that's not going to get somebody fired at a university. Because teaching is actually a really difficult thing to measure, and everybody kind of realizes that it is a difficult thing to measure. I remember one of the worst professors that I disliked during my undergrad, and was teaching me a course. And to this day, that worst professor sticks in my head. And if that is the case, right, that person actually taught me well. And because I didn't like it at the time, it sort of sticks in my head. And those lessons actually was pretty an effective teacher, right? Like, this is almost 20 years later. This is 20 years later. That's a pretty effective teacher. So what I want you to sort of think about is why you might actually pursue this and go through the ranks of actually talking to a dean or going through that. I think in this situation where you actually have worked through your ranks or worked through the ranks in the university, right? So the first thing that you want to go to if you're having a dispute, you probably want to talk to the professor first. Now, if you're uncomfortable with talking to the professor, you can go talk to the chair. And if you're uncomfortable talking to the chair, you go try to find a confidant that you could talk to. Most universities have something like an ombudsperson to actually have a conversation with, right? And if that's uncomfortable, all of those things are still uncomfortable, right? You might want to go talk to the dean and walk them through what's actually going on. And when you're getting, the reason why you actually go talk to a dean is all the other things that you've tried is just not getting anywhere. It's just not working, right? And generally with something like a grade dispute, that's not going to actually be that is not going to be a grounds for, the dean to sort of see you and talk to you, right? Generally, if it's an egregious grade dispute, right, like everybody gets failed in a classroom, that's a little unusual, and maybe you want to go talk to them, right? And it's not failed during a midterm or a test, it's failed at the end of the course, right? And at that point, they would maybe seek coaching or development and how to handle some of these particular situations. That's where the professor might actually be encouraged to get coaching or development in some sort of way. So what you're seeing is you have to sort of reasonably walk through what is an appropriate sort of circumstance and where it feels uncomfortable, and where you've actually had some really serious conversations, not with just your friends. You had a conversation with somebody else, right? Like somebody that is standoff, arm's length, and you're like, is this appropriate? Does this make you feel uncomfortable? And if that's the case, then you might want to actually go pursue higher levels in a university where it seems uncomfortable in that particular situation, right? So that is, and then on top of it, okay, so I also want to point out that if it has to do with anything that would be considered difficult to handle, right? Like sexual abuse, discrimination issues, by all means, go talk to the ombudsperson, because that's what they're there to deal with. And I'm probably, in those particular situations, I probably wouldn't even go talk to the dean, or I wouldn't even go talk to your professor, because that puts you in harm's length. But you go talk to the appropriate person, right? And so whether that is at your university, a counselor, for example, first of all, and they might help you to coach to go through the different other ways of going through the university, or the police or anything like that, that is an appropriate way to actually handle a particular situation like that. But if it is not any of those particular situations, right, and you're thinking like, I don't know, this is just not, an uncomfortable, or this is just a situation that's not as serious, then you can sort of pursue the sort of ranks in a university. And what you want to do is kind of move up the particular ranks until you get that sort of dispute resolved, whatever that looks like. So I just want you to sort of think about this and take a understanding approach in what is the likely outcome that you can actually accomplish. Generally, if it is sort of minor things, considered relatively minor, that the dean is probably not going to do a heck of a lot. And if it's really major, then they might step in and actually do something. And if it's really, really major, right, like serious stuff, like sexual abuse, discrimination, those kind of things, then that's where committees get involved in the university. And they might actually have a real conversation with you and with everybody else. So I want you to sort of walk this through and think about, do deans actually have power in this circumstance? A lot of times they don't, because it is a large organization that really, really wants to make sure that they do well for both their employees and as well as the students that they're actually training. All right, take care. Hopefully this explains a lot. Take care and have a wonderful day.